Imagine discovering that the very person you trust the most has betrayed you with someone who holds all the power over your life. That's what happened to me. My wife wasn't just unfaithful, she was tangled in an affair with her boss, a man who thought he could use his influence to force me into submission. But instead of backing down, I turned the tables. This isn't just a story of betrayal, it's a story of revenge, strategy, and exposing the dangerous games people play behind closed doors. Stay with me as I take you through how I fought back, exposed the lies, and reclaimed my life. I had a gut feeling something was off, but never did I imagine it would come to this. It all started with those fleeting glances, the texts she hurried to delete, until I uncovered the truth. My wife, Trace, had been having an affair with none other than her boss, Stanley Cross. As if the betrayal wasn't bad enough, Stanley's arrogance hit me like a brick. Not only did he admit to the affair, but he demanded that I accept it, threatening to wreck my life if I didn't. Can you believe that? Standing there, helpless, while the man who should respect boundaries tramples all over them, and then has the audacity to leverage his power to control me. He made it clear that if I dared to fight back, prison would be the least of my problems. But I'm not someone who backs down easily. I've faced worse. I'm a former Marine, trained to handle the most intense situations you can think of. Yet this was different. It was personal, much more intimate than any battlefield I've ever known. Trace's infidelity felt like a direct hit, but Stanley's smug satisfaction twisted the knife even deeper. His intention wasn't just to break up a marriage. He wanted to take control of my life completely. The man wasn't satisfied with just Trace. He wanted everything, and he thought he could make me bend. I couldn't just let that happen. It wasn't in my nature. But with the power he held over me, the stakes felt dangerously high. He wasn't just some random guy. He was my wife's boss, a man with influence, a man who could ruin everything I had built. But deep down, I knew I had to fight back, no matter the cost. It wasn't just about the affair anymore. It was about reclaiming my life from a man who thought he owned it. For 7 years, my life had felt stable, even comfortable. We had 3 beautiful kids, and everything seemed to be in place. My marriage to Trace, once filled with passion and trust, felt secure. At least, that's what I thought. Looking back now, there were signs I must have ignored. Small changes that, at the time, seemed harmless. Trace returning to work wasn't supposed to be a big deal, but things shifted. Slowly at first, subtle changes in her behavior, her attitude. She started dressing differently, more provocatively, spending longer hours at the office, leaving less time for us as a family. It was like the foundation of our marriage had been chipped away little by little without me noticing. The kids were my anchor. Every day, I'd come home from work, help with homework, cook dinner, and keep our routine going. I held on to that sense of normalcy, thinking if I just kept everything together, things would eventually get better. But Trace, she was distant. I could feel it. Conversations grew shorter, her phone always in her hand or tucked away. It's crazy how blind love can make you. I thought she was just stressed from work, maybe adjusting to the new responsibilities, but there was something deeper going on, something that was slowly tearing us apart without me realizing it. I never expected the satisfaction I used to feel from our life together to disappear so quickly. It's strange how you can share a home, a bed, and a life with someone but feel like a stranger creeping in. The intention behind her actions, though, became clearer over time. The long workdays, the extra effort in her appearance. It wasn't for me or even for herself. It was for Stanley. The family I thought we were building together. It was slipping through my fingers, and I was the last one to realize it. That night, I walked through the front door, and something felt off immediately. Trace was dressed up, more than usual, and I knew she wasn't going out with friends. She was waiting, almost impatient, for someone. The air between us was thick with tension. Before I could even ask what was going on, she hit me with it. Her tone was sharp, cold. She didn't ask for permission, didn't try to explain. She told me, flat out, that things were going to change. That she had a new set of rules for our marriage, and I had to accept them or else. Stanley, her boss, was now part of her life in a way that I would have to tolerate. I could hardly believe what I was hearing. My wife, the woman I trusted, was standing there with that audacity, laying down ultimatums. I was stunned, completely blindsided. Trace wasn't just asking for an open marriage. She was demanding it, as if I had no say, no power in the situation. The satisfaction she used to show when we made plans together was gone. Now, all I saw was a version of her that felt foreign. She was no longer asking for my understanding. She was telling me to live with it. The intention behind her words was clear: comply, or my life as I knew it would be over. Then came the threat that pushed me over the edge. She warned that if I didn't agree, she'd leave, take the kids, and I'd lose everything. In that moment, I realized this wasn't just a marriage on the rocks. This was a takeover. I felt the anger rise inside me, a burning sense of betrayal that went deeper than just an affair. But I wasn't going to back down. Not like this. If Trace and Stanley thought they could steamroll me, they were dead wrong. After Trace's ultimatum, I knew this wasn't something I could let slide. The anger still burned inside me, but I had to keep a clear head. I wasn't just going to storm into this without a plan. My military training kicked in, reminding me that the best confrontations are the ones you're prepared for. So, I took a breath, changed into something casual, something that would make me look calm, composed. The next step was to make sure everything was documented. I set up my phone to record. If things went sideways, I needed proof of what was really going on, their intentions fully exposed. I kept running over every possible outcome in my head, knowing Stanley would use every bit of his power to back me into a corner. But this time, I wasn't just reacting, I was ready to take control. I grabbed my service weapon. I wasn't planning on using it, but having it with me gave me a sense of security. This wasn't about escalating things into violence. It was about ensuring that if Stanley or Trace tried to push me further, I could defend myself. The satisfaction of being prepared, of having the upper hand, settled in. I had to stay ahead of whatever they were planning. It wasn't just about the affair anymore. It was about standing my ground and protecting what was left of my life. My intention was clear. I wasn't going to let Stanley or Trace destroy me. They could threaten, they could manipulate, but I wasn't going down without a fight. With my phone recording and my resolve set, I walked out the door, ready for whatever came next. This was no longer about saving my marriage. It was about saving myself from the destruction they were trying to bring into my life. Stanley showed up like he owned the place, his smug smile practically daring me to do something. I stood there, calm on the outside, but inside, every nerve was buzzing. He didn't waste any time, launching straight into his demands, as if I had no choice in the matter. He leaned on his position as an attorney, throwing around legal jargon, reminding me how easily he could strip me of everything. My house, my kids, my reputation. The satisfaction in his voice was undeniable. He enjoyed this power trip, thinking I was just another pawn in his game. But what he didn't realize was that I was already 2 steps ahead. I listened, keeping my cool, letting him lay out his intentions. He thought I was trapped. According to him, I had 2 options: accept the twisted arrangement he had with Trace, or lose everything in a legal battle I couldn't win. He even had the nerve to imply that jail time was in my future if I didn't play by his rules. But the more he talked, the more I realized he was underestimating me. He was used to people folding under pressure, but I wasn't just any guy. I wasn't about to let him take my life apart without a fight. So I stayed calm, never letting him see how much his words stung. I knew the recording on my phone was picking up every word he said. That was my ace in the hole. Stanley thought he had all the control, but he had no idea what I had planned. The more he threatened, the more I felt the resolve solidify inside me. This wasn't just about winning. This was about showing him I wasn't someone he could easily break. He might have thought he was untouchable, but I was ready to expose the cracks in his little empire. As Stanley continued his threats, I knew I had to stay 1 step ahead. I couldn't let him control the narrative. That's when it hit me. The best way to fight back was to expose everything. Let the world see who Stanley Cross really was. I kept my phone recording, making sure every single word was captured. His smug satisfaction was practically dripping off him as he talked about tearing my life apart. But that was about to change. My plan wasn't just about surviving this. It was about flipping the script and showing everyone what kind of man he really was. In that moment, I realized it wasn't just Trace and Stanley I was fighting against. It was the whole lie they were living, the manipulation, the deceit. The intention was clear: if I didn't accept their terms, they'd crush me. But they underestimated my determination. Exposing them wasn't just about revenge. It was about protecting my family, my future. I wasn't going to let Stanley's influence destroy everything I'd worked for. The video on my phone would be my shield, my weapon. With it, I could show Trace's betrayal, Stanley's threats, and the toxic game they were playing behind the scenes. I wasn't going to keep this a secret. My plan was to reveal it all, not just to the courts, but to Stanley's wife, his colleagues, anyone who mattered in his life. I'd hit him where it hurt the most. He thought he could control me, but the satisfaction I felt knowing I had the power to expose his intentions was overwhelming. The moment the truth came out, he'd lose everything. And I'd be there to watch as the empire he built on lies came crashing down. Things escalated quicker than I expected. Stanley must have sensed that I wasn't backing down, because out of nowhere, his driver, Max, stepped forward. The guy was built like a tank, and before I knew it, he lunged at me. It was clear they had no intention of letting me walk away from this quietly. But they underestimated me. My military training kicked in almost instantly, and I used Max's own force against him, disarming him with a quick move. The shock in his eyes was priceless. He didn't see that coming. Stanley stood frozen, watching his plan unravel as quickly as it started. Max wasn't done though. He came at me again, this time more desperate. But I stayed calm, focused. I could feel the satisfaction in maintaining control over the situation, no matter how chaotic it got. I wasn't just defending myself physically, I was defending everything I stood for. Max might have had brute strength, but I had intention, skill, and the kind of clarity that comes from knowing you're fighting for something bigger than just yourself. Within seconds, I had Max on the ground, his face twisted in frustration. Stanley, on the other hand, was still frozen, realizing just how badly he'd miscalculated. That's when I made Stanley call his wife. He needed to feel the consequences of his actions, right there and then. With Max subdued, Stanley had no choice but to follow my lead. As he dialed, his hands shook, his once confident demeanor crumbling. The truth was about to come out, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. The tables had turned. I was no longer the man he could push around. Now, I had the upper hand, and he knew it. Stanley's hand shook as he dialed the number. The confidence he once wore like armor was gone, replaced by fear. His wife answered, her voice light, unsuspecting. But that was about to change. I stood there, my heart racing, knowing that what came next would shatter her world, just like mine had been shattered. I watched as Stanley's face twisted with discomfort, but he couldn't back out now. I made sure he confessed everything. The affair, the manipulation, all of it. Her shocked silence on the other end of the line spoke volumes, and I could almost feel the impact of the betrayal as it sunk in. Stanley's wife demanded answers, her voice now frantic, full of confusion and anger. The satisfaction I felt wasn't from causing her pain, it was from finally watching Stanley's carefully constructed world start to crumble. He had no more lies to hide behind. The truth was out, and there was no going back. My intention was never to hurt her, but she deserved to know the man she'd been living with, just like I deserved to know the truth about Trace. Stanley, on the other hand, looked completely defeated, his power over me, and over her, slipping through his fingers. As Stanley stumbled through his confession, the reality of what he'd done hit him hard. He tried to minimize it, but there was no saving face now. His wife was devastated, her voice trembling with disbelief as she hung up the phone. I felt a sense of closure creeping in, but I knew this wasn't the end. Stanley still had some fight left in him, and I wasn't about to let my guard down. The confrontation had only just begun, and while exposing him was a victory, there was still more to come. As Stanley's wife hung up, the weight of everything settled in. The man who had walked into my home so full of confidence, so sure of his power, now stood there broken, stripped of the control he thought he had. I could see it in his eyes. He knew he'd lost. Max, still recovering on the floor, didn't move. There was nothing more they could do. I had exposed the truth, shattered the lies, and for the first time, I felt like I was the one in control. But there was no satisfaction in this victory, just a hollow realization that things would never be the same. I wasn't done yet. Before leaving, I made sure Stanley understood that there would be no more threats, no more games. He and Max were to leave my life and my family alone, or I'd release everything. The recordings, the confession, none of it would stay hidden if they tried to retaliate. The intention was clear. I wasn't going to let them drag me down any further. I needed to protect myself, my kids, and whatever future I could still salvage from this mess. As Stanley reluctantly nodded, I felt a strange sense of finality, though the road ahead still seemed uncertain. Outside, I took a deep breath. Neighbors gathered, concern etched on their faces, including an old retired colonel who had seen it all. I knew the police were on their way, and as much as I wanted to collapse from the exhaustion, I stayed on my feet. Paramedics arrived soon after, treating my injuries. I didn't feel the pain until they started working on me, but it wasn't long before the adrenaline faded and I began to lose consciousness. I knew I wasn't out of the woods yet. Stanley and Trace wouldn't go down quietly, but for now, I had won the first round. When I woke up in the hospital, the first thing I noticed was the weight of handcuffs on my wrists. My body ached, but that feeling was nothing compared to the shock of realizing I was under arrest. 3 days had passed since the confrontation, and in that time, Stanley and Trace had already made their move. I was being accused of attempted murder, assault, and illegal use of a firearm. It felt surreal, like I was trapped in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. The satisfaction they must have felt, twisting the truth and turning me into the villain, was enough to make my blood boil. Lying there, hooked up to machines, I had time to think. I could see it now, the perfect setup. Stanley had used his connections, his influence, to manipulate the story. Trace must have been in on it too, working alongside him to frame me. Their intention had always been to destroy me if I didn't comply, and now they were trying to finish the job. But I wasn't about to give up. I had the recording, the proof that could turn this whole situation around. All I had to do was stay calm and trust that justice would eventually prevail, even if it felt a million miles away at that moment. The hospital room felt like a prison cell, the walls closing in with every passing hour. I was surrounded by accusations, but I had hope. I knew I wasn't alone in this fight. T.O. Jack, my uncle, was already working on my defense. A retired lawyer with more fight in him than most men half his age, he wasn't about to let Stanley and Trace get away with this. I just had to hold on long enough for us to gather the evidence and show the world what really happened. The battle was far from over, but I wasn't going down without a fight. When Uncle Jack walked into the room, it was like a lifeline had been thrown to me. His presence was calm, but I could see the fire in his eyes. He didn't waste time with small talk. He got straight to the point, asking about every detail of the confrontation. I told him everything, especially about the recording on my phone. That recording was our key to turning the tide. Jack listened carefully, nodding as I explained. His intention was clear. He was going to fight for me like I was his own son. And if anyone could take on someone like Stanley, it was Jack. We both knew that getting that phone back was crucial. Without it, it was my word against Stanley's, and with his connections, that wouldn't be enough. Jack began laying out a plan, methodical and precise. He would use his legal expertise to dig into Stanley's background, find anything we could use to discredit him. But the recording, that was our ace. We needed to recover it before Stanley or Trace could get their hands on it. The satisfaction of knowing we had undeniable proof was a glimmer of hope in an otherwise bleak situation. Jack's strategy was simple: expose the lies and make sure the truth came out at the right time. We couldn't afford to make any mistakes. He assured me that we would retrieve the phone, but we had to be smart about it. The intention wasn't just to clear my name, it was to bring down Stanley's whole operation, to show everyone the man behind the mask. As we talked, I could feel the weight on my shoulders lighten, if only a little. With Jack on my side, I knew we had a fighting chance, and I wasn't about to let that slip away. The next day, the retired colonel from my neighborhood came to visit me in the hospital. His expression was serious, and I could tell something was weighing on him. He pulled up a chair and, in his calm but commanding voice, told me what had happened while I was unconscious. A couple of men had been seen lurking around my house late at night, trying to plant something inside. They hadn't expected to be spotted, but the colonel was always watching, always aware. He had confronted them, scaring them off before they could finish whatever they were up to. It was clear, they were trying to set me up. Hearing this, I felt a surge of anger. Stanley's reach was longer than I had imagined, and his intention was clear. He wasn't just content with the accusations. He wanted to bury me under a mountain of false evidence. The satisfaction he must have felt, thinking he could get away with it, made my blood boil. But knowing that the colonel had intervened gave me a sliver of hope. We had caught them in the act. This was proof that Stanley and his goons were going to any length to destroy me, and it was something we could use against him. Jack's face was tight with focus as I relayed the colonel's story. This changed everything. Not only did we need to recover the recording from my phone, but now we had to protect the crime scene at my house. Stanley was getting desperate, and that desperation could work in our favor. With the colonel's report, we had more ammunition for our defense. The setup had been exposed, but it wasn't over yet. Stanley and Trace were still out there, and they weren't going to stop until they had me where they wanted. But now, I was ready for their next move. Uncle Jack worked fast. With the colonel's warning about the attempted setup, we knew time wasn't on our side. Jack pulled some strings, and within a couple of days, he managed to recover my phone. It was hidden well, just as I had left it, untouched by Stanley or his goons. The satisfaction of holding that phone in my hands was overwhelming. It wasn't just a device, it was my lifeline, the evidence that could save me. Jack wasted no time reviewing the footage. Every word Stanley had said, every threat, every smug comment was there, clear as day. This was the proof we needed. Watching the video, I could feel the tension start to ease, if only for a moment. Stanley had no idea I had recorded everything. His arrogance had been his downfall. Jack, always the strategist, decided that we wouldn't reveal the recording right away. His intention was to keep it hidden until the perfect moment, using it as a knockout punch when Stanley and his team least expected it. We had to play it smart. Stanley would fight back with everything he had, but now, we had something he couldn't counter. The recording wasn't just a shield, it was a sword, and we planned to use it when it mattered most. With the phone secured and the evidence reviewed, Jack started working on a legal strategy. He knew the system well, and Stanley's influence wouldn't be enough to protect him once this all came to light. The recording showed his true intentions, his blatant threats, and his satisfaction in thinking he had already won. But now, it was our move. Jack was meticulous, planning every step with precision. We couldn't afford any mistakes. The battle was far from over, but at least now, I had something solid to hold on to, a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, we could turn this nightmare around. I didn't expect Trace to show up at the hospital. When she walked in, her face was hard to read, part guilt, part desperation. She sat down beside me, and for a moment, we just stared at each other, the weight of everything between us too heavy to ignore. Then, she broke the silence. Stanley had sent her to make a deal. Their intention was clear. They wanted me to plead guilty, take the fall, and agree to be placed in a psychiatric facility. It would all go away, she said, if I just admitted to being unstable. The satisfaction in her voice was gone, replaced by an urgency that told me they were starting to feel the pressure. I could see the cracks in her confidence. Trace wasn't as sure of herself anymore. Stanley's plan wasn't holding up like they had hoped, and now they were scrambling. But I played along, pretending to consider her offer, acting like I was defeated. I let her believe that I might actually take the deal. After all, what choice did I have? It was clear she thought she could manipulate me one last time. She didn't know about the recording, the evidence we had stacked against them. She thought I was still in the dark, still powerless. I listened to her plea, nodding, keeping my emotions in check. But inside, I knew exactly what I was going to do. Trace's attempt to save herself only solidified my resolve. They were desperate, and that desperation was going to be their downfall. When she left, I couldn't help but feel a sense of calm wash over me. The satisfaction of knowing the truth was on my side gave me the strength to keep pushing forward. Their time was running out, and soon, the tables would turn for good. The day of the hearing felt like the longest of my life. I walked into that courtroom with Uncle Jack by my side, ready for whatever Stanley and Trace had in store. They sat across from me, their expressions smug, as if they were still holding all the cards. But Jack and I had something they didn't expect, solid evidence that would change everything. As the trial began, their lawyer made his arguments, painting me as the aggressor, the unstable one. Stanley sat there with satisfaction, confident that his plan would work. But he had no idea what was coming. When it was Jack's turn, he stayed calm, methodical. He laid out our defense piece by piece, building tension with every word. Then, with perfect timing, he revealed the recording. The courtroom fell silent as the video played, Stanley's threats echoing through the room. His arrogance, his intention to ruin me, all caught on tape. The look on his face was priceless. Shock, followed by panic. The judge, the prosecutor, even the jury, all of them were stunned. Everything Stanley and Trace had tried to hide was now out in the open, and there was no escaping it. The satisfaction I felt in that moment was indescribable. For the first time in months, I could see the light at the end of the tunnel. Stanley's lawyer scrambled to recover, but it was too late. The evidence was undeniable. The judge paused the proceedings, clearly needing time to process what had just been revealed. Jack leaned over, whispering that we had them exactly where we wanted. The courtroom was buzzing with tension, and for the first time, Stanley looked genuinely rattled. Trace sat there, stunned, her confidence shattered. The truth had finally come out, and now, all I had to do was wait as the pieces of their carefully constructed lie fell apart. The day of sentencing arrived, and the tension in the courtroom was palpable. Stanley, Max, and Trace sat before the judge, their faces drawn and tense. Gone was the smug confidence they once flaunted. Now, they were just waiting to hear their fates. The judge didn't hold back. Stanley, the mastermind of this twisted plot, was sentenced to 11 years for perjury, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy to incriminate me. The satisfaction that once lit his face was replaced by pure defeat. He had tried to use his power to crush me, but now the tables had turned. Max, who had attacked me on Stanley's orders, wasn't spared either. The judge sentenced him to 7 years for assault and aiding in the conspiracy. His intention to intimidate me had backfired spectacularly. He avoided my eyes as the sentence was read, knowing his role in all of this had landed him exactly where he deserved. And then there was Trace. The woman I had once trusted, the mother of my children, sat there in silence as the judge handed her 5 years. She had been part of the plan from the start, and now she was facing the consequences of her betrayal. As they were led out of the courtroom, I felt a strange mix of emotions. The satisfaction of seeing justice served was real, but there was no joy in it. This wasn't a victory. It was the end of something I never wanted to happen in the first place. Stanley, Max, and Trace had all paid the price for their actions, but in the end, none of us walked away unscathed. The battle was over, but the scars would remain. Now it was time to pick up the pieces and move forward, starting a new chapter that, hopefully, would be free of the pain they had caused. With the trial behind me and the sentences handed down, it was time to start over. I made the decision to move away, to leave the memories of that nightmare behind and focus on my kids. We needed a fresh start, somewhere far from the wreckage Stanley and Trace had left in their wake. It wasn't easy, packing up the life I had built, but deep down, I knew it was the right thing to do. The satisfaction of finally closing that chapter was bittersweet. The scars would heal, but the lessons I learned would stay with me. I found a new place, a quiet town where no one knew the story of what had happened. It was a chance to rebuild, to give my children a life untouched by the drama that had consumed us. Uncle Jack had been my rock throughout the entire ordeal, and as I thanked him for everything, I realized just how much he had saved me from. Without his guidance, his strength, I might not have survived Stanley's attack. His intention had always been clear: protect me, no matter the cost. And for that, I would always be grateful. As I settled into my new life, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in a long time. The weight of betrayal, the constant fight for survival, it was all behind me now. There was still work to be done, healing to be had, but I was ready. I looked at my kids, the future ahead of us bright and full of possibilities. I couldn't change the past, but I had the chance to build something better. This new beginning wasn't just about moving away, it was about finally reclaiming control of my life. The fight was over, and now, it was time to live again.
Keep watching our stories by clicking on one of the videos that appear on the screen, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to be alerted about new videos. See you next time.